Hello, everyone. Welcome to our summer lunch and learn series for New York City religious leaders and faith sector partners on increasing resilience to the climate crisis. My name is Lucy Cummings. I am the Senior Manager of Faith Sector Resilience at New York Disaster Interfaith Services. We go by NYDIS. And NYDIS is a not-for-profit federation. We're made up of 60 religious bodies, over 2,000 faith-based organizations, and 8,000 religious clergy and lay leaders. And together we work with governmental and non-governmental organizations at the city, state, and federal level to provide wraparound disaster readiness, response, and recovery services to New York City. The first question that many people are asking us is, why are we focused on climate resiliency? And there are 4 reasons. One is that climate degradation is one of the main drivers of disaster in New York City, whether we're talking about flooding or extreme heat, air quality, vector-borne diseases, or even the increasing number of folks fleeing climate disasters and seeking refuge in New York City. These are threat multipliers and increase our economic and health vulnerability. It is also a critical justice issue, and that, of course, is very important for our communities of faith. The crisis has a disproportionate impact on disinvested communities, especially communities of color, and houses of worship are on the front line serving these communities. The severity of the climate crisis is increasing, and frankly, the more we delay on developing adaptive strategies, the worse it will become. So this Lunch and Learn series is about preparing for and building resiliency to climate hazards. We are very grateful to our partners, FEMA. We will be hearing of course, from 2 FEMA experts today, Bricks and Mortals and New York State VOAD. And they are partnering with us on this series. So today we're talking about flood insurance. For some of you may or may not know, but 1/3 of New York City houses of worship are in flood zones in New York City. So of course, having sufficient flood insurance is critical for the ability of houses of worship to continue their operations and ministry after a flood. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Today, we're lucky to have with us 2 experts. Thomas Song is a resilience specialist at the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and he is an expert on flood insurance generally, but on their National Flood Insurance Program. We are also happy to have Race Hodges. He is the faith-based coordinator for FEMA Region 2. And for those who don't know, we're all located in FEMA Region 2. And he is an incredible resource for faith communities in New York City who are trying to understand and seek disaster services, specifically for faith communities and the neighborhoods they're serving. Our format is pretty simple today. We will have our brilliant speakers present, and then we're just opening it up for Q&A. It's meant to be informal, and we will wrap things up at the end with a very quick poll so we can get your feedback on how to improve this series. So with that introduction, I will now pass the reins over to Race, who will introduce himself and introduce Thomas.
Thank you. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you. As Lucy said, my name is Race Hodges, and I am the faith-based coordinator for FEMA Region 2. I'm here today with you in a supply closet at our World Trade Center office. So just here in New York City, and my job is to support faith-based organizations with their disaster preparedness needs. Before I pass it over to Thomas, I wanted to just take the opportunity to share a little bit about the work that I do and how we can support those religious leaders that are on the line that are interested in emergency and disaster preparedness. So a bit of what I do, I think about it in two different buckets. On the left side of the screen, I support faith-based organizations at the organizational level with preparing for disasters. So I provide trainings and workshops related to how houses of worship can develop emergency operation plans, so thinking about how they prepare, respond, recover, and mitigate risks for disasters. We also develop and support developing continuity of operation plans, the things that ensure that should a disaster occur, that house of worship is able to stay open and less likely to shutter their doors. So we provide support with writing plans of that nature and facilitating trainings and workshops for religious leaders on that topic. We also facilitate exercises. So whether they be tabletop exercises where we convene around a table and talk about different scenarios related to hazards and kind of exercise and talk about in a hypothetical manner what we may be doing as a community, at the federal level, at the state, local, nonprofit level, should certain types of disasters occur in the future. It's a great exercise and opportunity for us to talk about how, as a community, we're preparing, responding, and recovering to disasters. So I often really enjoy facilitating those types of exercises with houses of worship that are interested in that topic. We also provide technical assistance. So I mentioned the type of emergency operation plan, EOP, and a continuity of operation plan, COOP, support. But we also administer a number of grants at FEMA, one of which is the nonprofit security grant program, which typically is provided every single year and targeted towards nonprofits that are at risk to terrorism, and it funds things that seek to reduce that risk. We recently completed reviewing several of those applications from houses of worship across the city of New York and across the country, and we're able to provide technical assistance and support houses of worship that may be interested in pursuing that funding as well. On the other side, we also provide support for congregants of houses of worship with preparing for disasters. So I offer a lot of trainings and workshops on a number of different topics, such as individual and family preparedness. We have a preparedness ambassador program, which seeks to empower leaders of congregations to spread the message of disaster preparedness themselves. So we equip them with tools and resources to do that. One of my favorite trainings that I provide for congregations is called Until Help Arrives. The concept is that there are things that people can do to save a life before professional help arrives. So we talk about how to stop severe bleeding. We talk about how to apply tourniquets in situations of that nature. So I provide those types of trainings in churches and mosques and in temples, and I've done so several times throughout the region this year. We also have a lot of different youth resources. So for those of you that may have youth ministries or work with youth, we have a number of different products and tools and resources that we can support you with if you're interested in helping educate youth about how they can support disaster preparedness or how they can get involved with helping their communities prepare for a disaster. I also just wanted to include a couple of pictures of some of my work here in the area over the past few months. On Sunday, I was in the Bronx working with a mosque. In the upper left-hand corner, I just snapped a picture with the local imam there. It was just around the block from one of the fires that occurred over the winter of this year, and we had 82 people come out, and we taught them how they can save a life before a professional emergency response is able to report on site. So it was a great turnout, just an example of what we're able to support the religious community here with. On Tuesday, I was traveling out and met with a number of Hindu temples to further connect with them and build that partnership between FEMA and individual houses of worship and the people they serve. We have made videos in the past with how to make a disaster supply kit. So I know over the past couple of years, many houses of worship have invested in their telecommunications capabilities to be able to provide services virtually. And this third picture from the left is a picture that I took from a video recording session where we made a video, we put it on their Facebook page about how they can make a disaster supply kit. And just a few other, photos from various trainings and workshops that we've done. I love to get out into the field. So if any of the leaders that are on this webinar now or are watching this webinar at a later date are interested in establishing this relationship with myself, I would be more than happy to connect with you. Again, my name is Race Hodges. I'm the Region 2 Faith-Based Coordinator for the National Preparedness Division right here in New York City. And if you are interested, if you want to ever reach out, my email address is race.hodges@fema.dhs.gov. I'm very thankful and very thankful to have one of my colleagues here, Thomas Song, who is really going to take over and talk about the topic for today, which is related to climate resiliency and flood insurance. It's such an important topic. I have a deep vested interest in making sure that our faith community is able to provide the critical services that they do in the aftermath of a disaster, the spiritual care, the emotional care, the sheltering, the feeding, and anything that we can do to support the resiliency of the faith sector here is something that I'm very passionate about. And there are many steps that houses of worship and our religious communities can take related to climate adaptation and being prepared for flooding. And so I hope that for those of you that are here today or watching this at a later date are able to take away some information about how you may be able to become resilient in the face of an increasing flood risk around our country. So Thomas, I'll pass it over to you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Lucy. Thank you, Race. And thank you all for participating. I think I am having problems with my PowerPoint. So I am going to try my best to get this resolved while I speak. This audience is probably very familiar with stories, using stories to educate. And we at FEMA, we're trying to do the same, but I think our stories are not as interesting because we use numbers, and numbers have very little value except for what you assign to them. And we often use numbers to make our case. And if I can get my PowerPoint to work, we may be able to do this better. Hold on 1 second. All right, I'm going to try this one more time. And I thank you for your patience here. In this new remote world, there are still things that we're learning to cope with. Okay. All right, here we go. Race, are we good?
Yeah.
Excellent. So like I said, we tell our stories using numbers, and these numbers often have no meaning because there's no context to it. We use large numbers because we think we can make our cases better. And I want to do a very quick exercise with this group. So I want everyone to think of the difference between a million and a billion. Just in your mind, however you would think of that. Somebody asks you, what's the difference between a million and a billion? Okay, you have that idea? Well, what if I put it in context? That a million seconds is 11 and a half days. And then a billion seconds, close to 32 years. Does that change the way you think of these numbers? Because oftentimes when you put it in context, that's when that lesson can be heard. Because at FEMA, when we talk about natural disasters, and today we're going to really concentrate on flooding, we talk about the impacts, the amount of people, 443,000 people in New York City were affected by flooding in one way or another. minor to catastrophic. It's a big number, but we need to really think about that one person, that one family that was impacted. Because flooding on paper sounds a lot easier than it is in real life. You get flooded, you get money, you recover, you rebuild, and you move back. If any of you were personally impacted or know someone, you know that is not the case. And in fact, the road to recovery, putting together the pieces of your life, is a long and often hard path. And so here at Mitigation, where Rafe and I work, where I work, we are trying to minimize that risk so that when the impacts do happen, it could be lessened. And so that that road could be shorter, right? The suffering could be less. Where does flood insurance come into play? Well, flood insurance is one tool to provide the financial assistance for people to rebuild and recover. Because we often don't think, yes, I'll just build back after this storm, but how? With what money? And that just adds to that stress level. So today, I'm going to talk about two things: how flood insurance comes into play and can help, as well as mitigation. How we can do things to our buildings, our structures, whether it is the house of worship or your congregant's home, what actions can be taken to address the risks that they face. And I want to start with the house of worship. We, as far as insurance is concerned, we consider this a commercial property because we only look at things either residentially or commercially. Now, there's a lot of information here. I don't expect you to read it now. I put a link on this slide along with the subsequent slides so that you can access and read this information when you have time.
Just to note, we'll be sending out this deck to everyone.
Great, thank you, Lucy. And for you to know that for commercial properties that the National Flood Insurance Program underwrites, or what the federal government underwrites, the limits are $500,000 for the building, and $500,000 for the properties within the building. That doesn't mean that everything is included, and that's what you're going to see in this box. And again, there's a link here. You can read this when you have that chance to really pay attention. And this is important because some of the frustrations we hear with people who are impacted by a flood is they feel that they were either cheated or shortchanged, but they may not have understood what was actually covered, what part of that building is covered, or what part of the contents within that building are covered, and did you pay for both? And for the house of worship, for the houses of worship, you probably have assets that are not the usual. It's not a sofa, it's not a TV, it's not a stove. And those are the things that you really need to speak with an insurance agent to understand what would be covered, or if there's an additional coverage or a different rider, something special in the insurance policy that is necessary to cover that. But there are probably many things that cannot be replaced. And I think Lucy was saying you had a speaker prior who spoke about don't put things in the basement. Elevate them off the floors. If you can put them in a flood-proof box, container, that would also help. And there are documents, if you can put that in something as simple as a Ziploc, a watertight Ziploc, or something that is more commercial grade to prevent water from damaging documents or paperwork, that is also a great investment to make. Because we'd rather not replace the things we lose. We'd rather not lose them to begin with. As far as your congregants, their homes are probably the biggest asset they will ever have in their life. And they should make that investment on protecting that from the damages of something like a flood. And here is an infographic. Again, the link is there. It's a it's a two-pager, but it simply explains what flood insurance does for homeowners. It is important that they make sound decisions and they are informed decisions. One of the big things in New York City are basements. Okay. I grew up in New York City. I understand every square foot in a house is precious. And so oftentimes basements are fully furnished. And then if there was damage or impacted, there's an expectation that that would somehow be replaced. But we all know water goes to the lowest levels. And basement coverage is very limited to the mechanicals and certain parts of that structure. And so again, it's important that people are informed and go into this understanding what it is that they're paying for. One of the big things that we have in New York City are renters. We often hear renters don't think that they can get any type of insurance. But that's not true. And we want to make sure that people are aware of what is available to them. We call this contents insurance. You can call this renter's insurance if you like. This has nothing to do with the building, the structure itself. As a renter, you don't have responsibility for it. But contents insurance is exactly that. It covers what's within that structure, but it is not inclusive of everything. So people should understand what it is. And if you had a TV that, let's just say you paid $1,000 for, and it's 5 years old, and it gets damaged through flood and you have content insurance, they're not going to give you $1,000 because it's no longer worth that amount. And in fact, what they'll do, and again, I'll just do this simply, was after 5 years, maybe they say as a 10-year lifespan, and they'll pay you $500. These are the things that people need to understand going into this. Not to be explained by you or I, but they need to speak with an insurance agent. And what we often tell people, don't shop around for the cheapest policy, best policy. Shop around for the best agent. Because not every agent understands flood insurance, and you are going to put a lot of trust in these people, and they get compensated for it. So they should do their jobs properly. So you need to be a prudent shopper, speak with multiple insurance agents, make sure they understand what they're doing, make sure you're getting the advice that you need. Going back to that commercial insurance for a house of worship, we've often seen commercial structures, the first $500,000 they'll get under a national flood insurance policy, and then they'll work with their broker to get private insurance if that building has a value greater than $500,000. So you can mix and match. One of the things about—
Sorry, Thomas, can I ask, how are agents compensated? How are they paid? And how do you know if an agent's good or bad?
Well, that's the second part is a very tough question. It's through these conversations you have. These agents are supposed to be your advocate. Right? They have what they call a fiduciary responsibility to look out for your best interest. We know there are bad actors out there. We know there are people who are not acting in full faith or acting on behalf of their client, or they may not know things, and they may not have the knowledge to advise you on certain policies or certain financial instruments that if they're not knowledgeable on it, they shouldn't be speaking to you about it. So how do you find out? It's that gut instinct. Are they saying the right things? Oftentimes they'll talk about giving something tailored advice. Right? Not everyone should get flood insurance. Not everyone should get renter's insurance. What if you don't have assets that are worth insuring? Why would you pay something to cover for coverage that you didn't need? And I'm sorry, and Lucy, what was the first question again?
Who pays them?
So through your premium, you will get a bill, and from that bill, they will get a commission. So if you paid $1,000, and under the National Flood Insurance, I believe the commission is about 15%, they would get $150. You would not pay them above and beyond that premium. You pay your premium, and that commission is baked in. And that goes for private insurance as well. Whatever quote they give you for the premium, their commissions are baked into that. And for everybody, please, you can interrupt me at any time if you have any questions, and feel free to ask any questions if I'm not explaining anything properly or I'm missing something. So now I want to get into some of the impacts of floodwaters. You know, you often think, oh, fast-moving water, you get that risk, you understand the damage it can cause. But even rising water can create a lot of damage. And what you see here is the arrows. There's pressure. So if you have a crawl space or even a basement wall, when the water level starts to rise and the inside has no water, there is now more pressure from the outside than there is on the inside. And that's what we call hydrostatic pressure. We have seen foundations collapse. We have seen walls come down. We have seen crawl spaces get damaged because of this pressure. And so rising water is one of the things that, again, maybe you don't think as a risk to the building itself, but can create lots of damage, lots of structural damage. So if there is a crawl space, there are certain venting, there are certain vents there that are available that don't just let water pass in and out freely, but it regulates. There are certain vents that do give you a reduction in your cost of insurance. Again, that is something that should be talked with your insurance agent. The impacts of flooding, I cannot speak enough of the financial impacts, the damages it can cause, and the stresses that come subsequent to that. Many people don't like to feel like they're at risk. They don't want to feel like they're at danger. And it's important that we let them know that, you know, flooding happens anywhere. And what we saw with Ida is that when it rains, wherever it can rain, it can flood. And there are areas that would just never seen flooding, or that would have a very low risk of flood. But with that downpour of water, the storm, the amount of water that came down in such a short period of time, the sewers, the stormwater systems were all inundated. That water just ran down the street, and it's just going to go to the lowest part, which is often people's basements. And we like to say, even if you're not in a high risk area, if you can elevate your mechanicals, do so. If you have a washer dryer, if you put them on cinder blocks, it gives you another foot of protection. Because again, it's better not to have to replace these things. But if you do have to replace them, you'll be out of pocket, because there are a lot of things that people don't understand about homeowners insurance and flood insurance, and I'm going to get into that next. We hear this all the time. My area is never flooded. It's been 100 years. It's been through multiple generations. But that does not mean that there, in the future, that won't happen. And what we've seen, that the storms have intensified, the rains come down faster, the levels of water are rising, and it is creating risks in areas that may have not seen it before. There are other things that may happen. Rain, high winds, branches, debris, getting into the street, diverting the flow of water into somebody's house. Yes, that is bad luck. But no, nobody's going to come and help you. If you have to be in that position to help yourself. One of the things we talked about was the renters. That was a big thing with Ida. We had a lot of renters that were really that were left on their own to recover because they didn't have the financial means. There was no money to be provided for some of these folks. Homeowners insurance does not cover flood. It is very specific. They sometimes will give you a notice saying that flood insurance has to be a separate policy. One of the reasons is floods happen often. When they do, they involve a large geographic area. So it's a very costly thing for the private market to cover, and they do, and I will get into that. And as far as the National Flood Insurance Program, the NFIP, or the FEMA flood insurance, we don't drop people, don't exclude people. We may be the insurer of last resort. We would like to be the insurer of your first choice, but that flood insurance is available to anyone and everyone. And the big thing, people often think, well, if there's a large-scale flood, FEMA will come in and start writing checks and will give you disaster assistance. In the past 11 years, since Irene, FEMA has only paid residents 4 times for what we call individual assistance. Okay, so this is monies that go to homeowners. Now, of the 4 times, 1 was COVID, so that's a non-flood event. So in the past 11 years, because of a flood, there were only 3 times when FEMA gave the public some money. And individual assistance is not meant to make people whole. It is a gap measure. It is to provide some assistance so that people can do some preliminary work to get back into their house so that their home is clean. Maybe they can have some food. Maybe they can pay for transportation. Whatever it is only to carry them over until they begin their road to recovery. And as you can see, the individual payout, which is that column which says average IA payout, that is not a lot of money compared to what you see in the insurance payout, which is the average claims payout. For people under Sandy, the average claim paid out was $77,000. The average resident got $8,000 if they did not have insurance. So the idea that FEMA will come in and be this saving force or provide the financial assistance for people to recover, it is not true. FEMA, the federal government, we will give you the tools, but there is an expectation that people can take care of themselves. If they can't, we do give some financial assistance. And what's not shown here is during presidentially declared disasters, the Small Business Administration does come in. They are now, they now have the authority to provide low-cost loans. Insurance is not a loan. What you get paid for your flood insurance policy does not have to be paid back, as opposed to what happens with the Small Business Administration. As far as costs of insurance, again, there is this one, it's a 2-sided, 1-page handout, and there is a link down below for people to see. And now this has to do with how insurance is rated. So again, you can't see it?
There we go.
Okay, sorry, I think I have a little latency in my connection. So this is a rate guide. This explains how flood insurance is rated, both for commercial and for residences. It's good to be informed, so when you have these discussions with your agents, you understand what goes behind that pricing. It's a lot of information. I mean, to get really deep into it, it's more than the average person or administrator or caretaker of that house of worship really needs to do. There are so many other things to worry about. And that's why, Lucy, the advice is find that agent who you trust. Find that agent who is knowledgeable and is doing the right thing and is acting on your behalf. Because there's no way that we could know everything we need to know to either maintain, administer, or live in a building or a home. And so, yes, the private market is back. They are offering flood insurance, not just for commercial, but for residential properties. As far as FEMA is concerned, we want people to be insured. We want to make sure that if they are flooded, whether it's a localized flood or a large-scale flood, that they have the financial means to get on that path to recovery. But it is very important people are making the informed decision and not just chasing the low-cost policy or something that they think might help them without understanding what it is what it is that they're looking for. The thing with the NFIP or the FEMA-backed or the federally backed insurance policies, we do have a cap, $12,000. Believe it or not, there are some homes that do pay that amount. Policies are transferable, so as far as insurance is concerned, this is the only, I think it's the only type of insurance where if I buy a house from Race, I get to continue his policy, as opposed to health insurance where Race's policy and my policy are on two different paths or completely separate. There are some eligibility for FEMA grants, and I think that's going to be later down on this presentation. But most importantly, I think, Lucy, you brought up something before this broadcast where you talked about the small insurance companies that had to file for bankruptcy or that went under and had been required the state or the federal government to come in and to bail them out and pay out those policies. The federal government, no matter what you hear about how much the NFIP is in debt, they will always make good. They will pay out. This is the full faith and credit of the federal government. NFIP policies are not always the cheapest. That I think that's very clear. But understand that in the private market, they might get you, they might start you at a low cost. That cost can increase, and that cost increase is not regulated. Also, if you file a claim or two, that company can drop you, and that is not regulated. So there are a lot of things to consider. On the positive side with private policies, they will insure things that the federal government will not. In fact, I've heard of private policies that will cover basement content, that sofa, the wall-to-wall carpeting, whatever it may be down there, that the NFIP would not cover, the private policy would cover. And going back to that commercial property example, you could mix and match. Maybe maybe it makes sense to have both. Maybe it makes sense to have one. But again, two things. I can't reiterate enough. Work with someone you trust, someone who is knowledgeable. Go in there informed. Understand what it is that you are buying. Understand this protection so that there's no misunderstandings down the road, or there is a gap, there is some risk that you are undertaking that you're not aware of. As far as affordability is concerned, this is an ongoing effort. I know FEMA headquarters, Congress, and the executive branch, they're all trying to figure out how do you make flood insurance more affordable? I don't have any updates at this point, but understand that this conversation is taking place. There are our Senator Menendez in New Jersey, Senator Schumer in New York. They are huge. They're very involved in this. They're advocating for lower cost policies to ensure that it is available for everyone, because it is something that everyone needs to have, or at least should think of getting. How do you know you're at risk? Well, Lucy said through their analysis, about a third of the houses of worship were in some type of flood zone. Now, here's the rule of thumb. If you're on Water Street or River Lane, you're probably in a flood zone. Now, if you can hear or see or smell the water, you're probably in a flood zone. But in this day and age, we also have web applications. And again, there's a link here with the FEMA site. What's my flood hazard? You can punch in an address. It will zoom into it. In New York City, I believe there are a number of tools that are available, but this is the one that FEMA, this is the one that we've created. It tries to simplify understanding your flood hazards. We have a lot of documents that back it up. But again, the private market, third party, New York City, they have done a phenomenal job of building tools that are simpler or that can educate even better. But understand that there are a number of resources out there for you all. And when we talk about mitigation, right, so this is not really directly associated with insurance, because we would rather not have to replace something because of flood damage. When it comes to commercial properties, there are more mitigation actions that are available. I don't want to get into all of them. The two that really stand out or that are very specific to commercial properties or a house of worship would be wet flood proofing and dry flood proofing. And wet flood proofing means that you actually let the waters go in, but that you use some wet, I guess, resistant or wet-proof either materials or some type of design so that when you allow the water into the structure, it does not create, or it does not impact or have any damage. Now, dry floodproofing, on the other hand, is much more structural. It is like some of these examples that you see down here where you can barricade or create these, I guess, mobile dams or flood blockers, whatever, however you want to refer to it. I know New York City had a program where they were offering some, it's not like sandbags, but you put it on top of openings so that, you know, a couple inches of water, maybe a foot of water, it can help keep the water back. But in the commercial space, there are things that can be done to keep the water out. Now, that is an investment. Again, this is something that needs to be spoken with your agent to see what actions you can take and what type of mitigation credit or how much can you get paid back, a reduction in cost to make it a worthwhile investment. And there are things that you may want to do nonetheless, and that it might not provide 100% protection against floods. It may not impact or reduce the cost of your insurance, but if you could, if you feel like that is something that can be done, that's better than nothing, absolutely, there are things online. I think, Lucy, you were asking about, or Race was talking about low-cost mitigation actions. There's a lot of information out there. We are not proponents of, I guess, mitigation measures that don't provide 100% safety because of, you know, we don't want people to think that, hey, I put a sandbag in front of my basement window and I should be safe. That can cause more harm than good. But again, the informed resident, the informed administrator, whatever role you are, understand what it is that you're doing, what the risks are, what protection it provides, and as long as you're willing to take that risk or assume it, maybe there are other things you can do to reduce on the inside of that structure of what could be damaged or what could be impacted. For homeowners, we have plenty of brochures, mitigation ideas, and retrofitting. Again, the links are provided on this slide. Most of the times for homes, it would be either elevating a home, or if you have a basement, you fill in that basement. Then you move your mechanicals upstairs, and you put those special flood vents, as I mentioned earlier, in that crawl space that you would create. Oftentimes, people with basements in the high flood hazard areas, they often see water in their basements periodically. They don't live there. Maybe it's just there to have some of their mechanicals. But those are the homes that we really push to. There's no point in allowing water to enter your structure. If you can fill that, understand what that cost is to fill the basement, move those mechanicals, and then what would that savings look like on your flood insurance, and make that financial decision. But more importantly, the more you can keep water outside your home, the less impact that water can have. That will reduce the stress, the emotional stress, the need for finances to recover, and really just living in a home that was damaged that may soon have mold or mildew that can have physical harm to the inhabitants. And we are always looking for communities to help these residents. And one of the things that FEMA does is we have a grant program. And depending on who you are, if you're a house of worship and you were damaged by floodwaters and there's a presidentially declared disaster, you would be eligible for HMGP funding. FMA, which is flood mitigation assistance, that is a yearly thing. And if there is an action that the House of Worship would like to take, they would be eligible. I think we just learned through BRIC that a House of Worship or any nonprofit, they are not eligible. But maybe there are ways that you can work with the city. The city would be an eligible applicant. And if there is some type of coordination or some partnership, maybe they can apply for something that would be better, that would improve or protect an area near that House of Worship, near the residents, et cetera, and that FEMA would pay that or would pay some of that cost. The thing here is with grants, the state administers these grant programs, so it's not something where Race and I can kind of advise a local community, a resident, or a House of Worship. You'd have to work through the state, but we are always there to provide counsel, to give you the ins and outs, at least the parameters of the program. And if we need to be the go-between between you and the state, we would be happy to do that, or for you and the city. Because I think when we put our heads together, that we can get very creative with this. FEMA is not in the business of saying no to people. Right? We are always finding ways to say yes. We are held to regulations. These are things that we cannot, we need to abide by. But there is often space within those regulations that we can be creative, we can come up with ideas. And it's not always going to be us. We rely on you, the faith-based organizations like DIS, who advocate. Once we put our heads together, it is amazing what we can accomplish. So we are all open to that. And just I want to round this out by kind of highlighting some of the things that New York City has done. They have floodhelpnewyork.org, a lot of great information. I think the city has done a phenomenal job in addressing the risks in the area. And look, they know the folks in the city, they work with partners like you at DIS. You all know your areas better than the federal government. We are here to support you, because when you are successful, we are successful. And you have the hard work. So there are things that we do as far as policy or missions or programs, but sometimes we miss the point, right? We can't tell everyone, get flood insurance, get flood insurance. There are people who don't have the financial means. Maybe there are people who don't have the assets that require that kind of coverage. There's no point in telling them, because sometimes we're not giving them the respect that they deserve. But these mitigation actions, putting paperwork in a waterproof bag or a Ziploc or whatever it is, these are the things that are kind of universal in how they can help almost everybody. And we want to provide that counsel. And again, organizations like DIS and others, these community groups, advocacy groups, we are here to help you. So please use Race, myself as a resource. Any ideas, any questions, come to us. And that would also be open to your members, the people on this call. So look, I want to thank everyone for their time. I'm wrapped up here. I think Race and I are here to answer any questions. So Lucy, I'll hand this back to you to moderate.
Yeah, the floor is open. All right, I will start out with a question that we hear a lot. When do you get your money? So on average, what kind of what's the general time period of when you would be reimbursed by your flood insurance?
No, that's a great question, and now it's very clear. I wasn't prepared to answer that question. I think I can only talk about policies that are written by the National Flood Insurance Program, the NFIP, or the FEMA-backed policies. You will often get a small check once you file that claim. They will ask you to keep your receipts, to take pictures, anything that will back up what happened in your particular property or your house of worship. There is a small kind of advance that is made, and then it depends on the situation. They have to get someone to take a look at an adjuster to take a look at the damages. So that could range, you know, from days to weeks, depending on how large scale that disaster was. I'm trying to recall with Ida, at least in New Jersey, I don't think it was as severe as that we needed to get adjusters from out of the state. I think that that happened, but not to that extent. So understand that when there is a large-scale flood event, local resources are, you know, overwhelmed, and then we have to go find resources elsewhere. So I could have sworn it was maybe 2 weeks that people were talking about when an adjuster came to look at their house, and then thereafter, I don't know how long it took for them to get paid, but it is not immediate. With the NFIP, as I said, FEMA is always looking to find ways to say yes. We try to make our payments promptly. With the private sector, with the private market, I've heard stories. It's all anecdotal. I don't have statistics. They may operate slightly different. So that is so Lucy, that's a great question, and that's one of those questions to ask an agent you're speaking with. Hey, how long does it normally pay out? If I went with, you know, ABC company instead of FEMA, what's their history? What do they do? And if that's not information they know offhand, obviously they can do their research, but it would be nice to do that kind of comparison. How quickly do you get your money? How often do you have to appeal a claim, right? That they don't pay you what you think you deserve or what you have evidence to get reimbursed for. These are all questions that, again, shouldn't be your responsibility. It should be the specialist, the agent, or the industry professional.
Folks can also put their questions in the chat box if they're more comfortable doing that.
I have a question, Thomas. So if a faith leader that is on the line now or watching this webinar wanted to take that first step and find an agent and have that conversation, is there a website or is there a place that they can go to find an agent in their area?
Yeah, well, you know, floodsmart.gov, okay. Floodsmart, one word, .gov. There is a find a provider, but FEMA does not make any recommendations. We just list contacts. It's almost like a directory. It's unfortunate, but you need to be a prudent buyer. Right? You need to be informed. You need to shop around. And I think these conversations you have with these agents can be very telling. You know, you even in-person meetings if possible. Maybe you already have a relationship with somebody. Maybe there's someone in the congregation who does that. Trust is the biggest thing. Knowledge, you want them to make sure that they are doing the right things on your behalf, providing you sound advice.
Thank you. I just typed in floodsmart.gov, and it looks like there's a place to type in your or choose a state and type in your zip code. Yep. And I see a number of different insurance companies that are listed here that serve the area. Things that like I hear, you know, Allstate, Farmers Insurance, you know, some of these Liberty Mutual. So these types of insurance companies also look like they have agents that can underwrite flood insurance policies.
Right. Yeah. No. And New York City also has some great resources. There are professional associations like the Professional Association of Insurance Agents. And then there are advocacy groups. I mean, you know, there is a lot of resources out there. Unfortunately, you have to do some legwork to do your own research.
Are there for when insurance is unaffordable? You had mentioned the mitigation steps that you can take, but are there any pathways for grants, or where would you look for that in New York City, Thomas?
Well, New York City, I would go to, I would speak with the New York City Offices for Emergency Management. They would probably be your best resource. These grant programs, they are competitive. There's never enough money to meet the demand. And so there are programs that happen within the state and within the city to help those people. At the very least, advise them. What we're looking for usually is someone who is at the most risk, maybe has a history of being flooded, where it makes sense to use public money to improve their private property. And I want everyone to just think about what that grant is. We're taking taxpayer dollars to improve somebody's home or business or maybe a house of worship. We need to make sure that we are making the right decision. And so there is a financial component to it, what we call a benefit cost analysis. If we've been paying somebody $100,000 for every time they flooded, and they flooded 5 times, but that home is only worth $200,000, well, it makes fiscal sense to maybe pay that person out, spend $200,000, buy that house, demolish it. Nothing could ever be built on that property again, and now we don't have to make payments again in the future. So there are a lot of decisions that go on that happen behind the scenes. The state, again, is the administrator of the program. They are always open to talking with either residents, organizations, et cetera. I can find a point of contact for you, Lucy, and I can get you that name.
Sadly, we don't have time to go into that, but it would be a very interesting conversation about equity, because you're bought out for $200,000 and there's nothing affordable for $200,000. So I think in New York City, the issue of flood insurance equity, I think perhaps would be another conversation, because congregations are in that situation constantly. We do have a question before you go. I think it will be the last question about mold remediation.
Yeah.
Claudette, would you be comfortable just talking about it directly?
Sure. I'm a trustee at Greater Tabernacle Baptist Church, and we recently suffered mold due to the city backing. The sewage actually backed up into our basement. And, once it was said and done, like once it got drained out, moisture was left behind and it left mold. We did have a mold assessor come out to actually take a look at the property. And he took pictures of things that were damaged. And now we're in the process of mold remediation. And we did hire someone, but who's about to do the job about in August. But it's going to cost the church over $7,000. And I was just wondering if it was possible, could we get some sort of grant or assistance from FEMA?
Yeah, unfortunately, there is no assistance that would be available for this particular issue, as well as nothing that would pay out now. And this is where insurance comes into play. Sewer backup is not considered a flood,
Okay.
unless the flood caused that backup. So there has to be a flood event.
That backup.
Yep. And again, is this for your personal home or is this for the?
No, actually, this is a house of worship on 340 Common Avenue. And we just want to make sure that we're not like in a flood zone, because it seems like it floods in that area often. Right.
I can give you have my contact information. I'd be very happy to help you out afterwards. But to answer the first question, again, this has to do with what was under your policy. Was that covered? Did you talk to your agent? Did you file a claim?
I don't think we have flood insurance. We have nationwide.
Okay. I would seek it out anyway. Find out. Try to file a claim. The worst thing they can do is say no. I don't know about commercial policies. I mean, some homeowners may have small mold or remediation within what's covered. And again, this was recently, so there was no real flood event that happened in the area, correct?
This actually, we've been dealing with it for over a year now.
Okay. I would go to your agent again, file that claim, see what happens, see what's covered, and then going forward, maybe find out how much would it cost, what are they willing to cover, et cetera. And with the mold remediation, did that person tell you anything that can be done to mitigate that?
Yes, he gave us a proposal and he said there are some ways to take out the mold that he's going to do. And it was a detailed proposal. It's not bad compared to our other offer that was way too much for the same amount.
So I'll just jump in. Ms. Claudette, would you just put your contact details in the chat box? Was this a Hurricane Ida related issue?
Yes.
So there might,
Okay.
I'll look for information on that, on mold remediation on our end and get back to you. There might be some resources out there. I don't know, I'm not an expert on that, but we do have experts who are dealing with that. So if you just put your contact details in the chat box, I'll get back to you as well.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
and Lucy, if you can share that with me as well, let me
Sure.
see if this is related to Ida. Let me see what we can do, if there is anything.
Brilliant.
Okay, thank you.
So we are at time. So I'm going to cut off this this conversation and thank our speakers. Thank you, Thomas and Race. Greatly appreciated. I've learned a ton. We've been talking the FEMA team, Thomas and Race, about doing more in-depth flood conversations or flood learning events for houses of worship. So if that's something you think would be valuable, please send me an email because it is something we could do a deeper dive on if folks were interested in that. I would ask before you go that you fill out a very quick online poll to give us some feedback. Let me see, let me just turn this on. I'm launching it